When a police chief tries to bully a successful black woman business owner, he doesn't realize she's the last person to scare easy. What will happen when she stands her ground and forces the city to take a side? Let us know in the comments section below. Hello friends, if you new here then don't forget to hit subscribe button, and if you like then hit the like button also, and don't forget to tell me in the comments where you from watching this video. Maddie Bullock didn't just walk into rooms, she took them. Even in silence, her presence demanded attention. Today, that silence was deliberate as she stood in the middle of a sunlit atrium, watching contractors hustle around what used to be an abandoned warehouse in East Grafton. Her arms were folded, her expression calm, but her eyes tracked every bolt tightened, every beam hoisted. This building, once a dumping ground for broken furniture and broken dreams, was becoming something new. Something hers. Michelle Bullock called Dante, her foreman. They're asking about the second-floor blueprint adjustments. Want me to show them more? I'll take it, Maddie said, without looking away from the scaffolding being raised above her. Tell them to meet me by the freight elevator in 5. She adjusted the cuffs of her deep brown blazer, the one her assistant once said made her look like a corporate general. She didn't mind the comparison. Generals got things done. They also didn't flinch when men with more badges than sense came knocking. 3 weeks ago, she'd filed an official complaint about noise disturbances coming from the precinct building next door, late-night sirens during community events, reckless parking during school hours, unprovoked shouting matches that shook the walls of her newly opened community cafe. The Grafton East Police Precinct had ignored her emails. But the moment her letter hit the city's Office of Business Relations, the precinct took notice, and not in a way that screamed professional. They sent their notice in person. Or rather, he did. Chief Douglas Harland. 30 years in law enforcement, the last 10 as East Grafton's top cop, a man whose handshake felt like a dare and whose eyes flickered with suspicion before they even found something to suspect. He walked into her cafe like it was a crime scene. No greeting, no smile, just a frown stiff enough to press into concrete. You Maddie Bullock? He'd asked, already knowing. Depends, Maddie had replied, not even looking up from the community bulletin board she was rearranging. You here to order coffee or to try and intimidate me? That question had hung in the air like a punch that never landed. He hadn't answered. He didn't need to. That was 2 days ago. Since then, the precinct had upped its passive-aggressive games, suddenly ticketing cars parked within 10 feet of her building, even if they were legally parked, foot patrols loitering outside her windows, watching patrons, their radios chirping just loud enough to disrupt conversation. And just last night, one of her employees said they saw an officer snap a picture of her Wellness Wednesdays flyer and mutter, "Won't last long." Maddie didn't rattle easy, but she knew what this was. This wasn't about noise complaints. This was about a black woman owning too much, doing too well, and speaking too loud in a city that still liked its wealth behind white fences. She was still thinking about that moment when the freight elevator doors clanked open and she stepped inside with 2 young architects in crisp button-downs and wide eyes. Neither of them dared say it, but she could feel their nerves bouncing off the walls. She didn't blame them. When you're building something in a city like this, it wasn't just about construction. It was about presence. Ownership. The second floor is where the tech lab's going, she said, flipping the blueprint in her hands as the elevator creaked upward. We want those windows expanded to floor-length glass. Let the sunlight remind people. They're allowed to dream big here. They nodded, scribbling notes like interns on their first real gig. When they reached the second floor, she stepped off and walked toward the western wing, where insulation still curled out of wall frames like overgrown vines. She touched the exposed beam lightly, as if reassuring the building that its best days were ahead. And then, footsteps behind her. Fast. Clunky. Heavy boots. Miss Bullock, a voice called out, sharp, official, male. She turned slowly. Chief Harlan. Full uniform. Mirrored sunglasses, even though they were inside. Behind him, 2 patrol officers flanked the entrance. "Nice place you got here," he said, voice low, like it was supposed to mean something deeper. "Thanks," Matty said coolly. "It'll be even nicer when you stop disturbing my business with your unnecessary theater." His smile was more teeth than kindness. "Funny, I was just thinking the same about your flyers. Community wellness reform lectures? You sure you're building a business and not something more political?" Matty took a step forward, shoulders squared. "You mean educational? Supportive? Or are those words still threats to your kind of peacekeeping?" He moved closer. "You've been poking the bear, Miss Bullock. Filing complaints. Making noise. Stirring things." "I'm not stirring," she said. "I'm cleaning up the mess your people keep leaving behind." For a beat, no one said anything. One of the young architects behind her shifted uncomfortably. Then Matty smiled. It wasn't sweet. It wasn't polite. It was the kind of smile that says, "I know something you don't." "Funny thing, Chief," she added. "You might want to keep your voice down when you're in this building." "And why is that?" She leaned in, just enough to make him blink. "Because if all goes according to plan, you'll be signing your lease renewal with me next quarter." She walked past him without waiting for his reaction. Behind her, the silence was loud. And she loved it. Chief Douglas Harland stood frozen in place long after Matty Bullock disappeared down the corridor. Her words rattled around in his head like a bullet in a chamber, sharp, echoing, impossible to ignore. "You'll be signing your lease renewal with me." What the hell did that mean? Back in his cruiser, he slammed the door harder than he needed to and sat behind the wheel, gripping it tight enough to make his knuckles pale. She was bluffing. Had to be. There was no way the city would let someone like Matty Bullock, a community developer, a civilian, take over the precinct building. Not unless he was really out of the loop. But that was the problem, wasn't it? Harland had spent the last 30 years keeping a firm hand on everything inside his domain: patrols, partnerships, precinct morale. But lately, everything was changing. His officers were younger. More idealistic. Asking uncomfortable questions during shift meetings. The mayor had started inviting civilian liaisons into city budget talks, something Harland had always considered symbolic nonsense. And now this woman, Matty Bullock. Too calm. Too confident. With too much money behind her smile and too many people listening when she spoke. He pulled out his phone and tapped a contact, Deputy Mayor Linda Carson. She didn't pick up, but he left a message anyway, one word short of panic, too short of a threat. "Call me back. I need to know what Bullock's up to." Back at the Bullock redevelopment hub, Matty paced the 3rd floor, high heels ticking against the exposed concrete floor like a second hand on a clock. She wasn't watching. She wasn't rattled, yet. But she wasn't naive either. Harland had shown up earlier than she expected. She'd assumed she had another week or 2 before he caught on. Wind of the transfer process. "Dante," she called down the hall. "Bring up the parcel documents, the most recent ones. I want them in a folder, not an email." Her assistant jogged over within minutes, breath a little short, suit slightly rumpled. "You think he's going to push back that hard?" Matty raised an eyebrow. "You think people like Harland take losing well?" Dante shifted. "No, ma'am." "Exactly." She moved to the glass wall that overlooked the precinct building next door. It was ugly. Brutalist concrete, dirty blinds, antennas that looked like they hadn't transmitted anything useful since 2003. The symbol of everything stagnant about this city. And soon, if the mayor didn't fold under pressure, it would belong to her. But that wasn't why she wanted it. It wasn't about owning a police building. It was about reclaiming space. She remembered being 12 and walking past that precinct with her mom, Celeste, on the way to the East Library. Celeste had paused outside the building, lips pursed, holding Maddie's hand a little tighter. "You see that place, baby girl?" "Yeah. Never forget, walls like those were never meant to protect us." Now, nearly 30 years later, Maddie would finally put something meaningful in its place. A community center, yes. But more than that, a space with a restorative justice wing. Programs for youth mentorship, financial literacy, mental health advocacy. A full floor dedicated to public safety, reimagined by the very people who'd once been targeted by it. And if she was being honest with herself, a small sharp part of her wanted to see Harlan walk through those doors, not as king of the castle, but as a tenant. A knock broke her train of thought. It was Eileen, her lawyer and longtime friend. Her hair pulled back tight and her expression tighter. "We have a problem," Eileen said, walking in uninvited, which meant it was urgent. "Let me guess," Maddie said dryly. "The chief's already making calls." "Worse," Eileen said, setting down her laptop. "He's not going through the city. He's going through the union. There's buzz. He's trying to block the transfer by claiming operational interference." "That's not even a real term," Maddie muttered. "Doesn't have to be," Eileen replied. "He just needs to muddy the water long enough to make the city pull back." Maddie was silent for a moment, eyes flicking to the window again. She thought about her mother. About the marches, the rallies, the handwritten signs, and shoes soaked from protesting in the rain. Celeste never saw the top of the hill, but she had started the climb. Maddie had no intention of stepping back now. She turned back to Eileen. "Then we go public." Eileen blinked. "You sure?" "He's banking on silence." Maddie said, "Let's give him the opposite." By the time the sun dipped behind the horizon, Maddie's story was already trending on local social. Not flashy or self-congratulatory, just a short video. Maddie standing in front of the soon-to-be former precinct, explaining what she hoped to build. She spoke plainly, without drama, and ended with a sentence that cut deeper than any press release. "I don't want to take something away from this city. I want to give it back." The next morning, everything felt different. News vans lined the street like parade floats waiting to launch. A crowd had gathered outside the precinct. People held signs with words like, "Justice by Design," and, "We believe in Maddie." Some had come from across town, others just a few blocks over. A mix of ages, colors, and stories, but one message. They wanted change. Inside the precinct, Harlan watched through his blinds, his jaw clenched. He'd seen crowds like this before, but they were never on her side. "She's manipulating them," he muttered to no one in particular. But deep down, he felt it. The ground wasn't shaking. It was shifting, quietly, permanently. And for the first time in a long time, he realized maybe he wasn't the one holding the badge anymore. Maybe this city was starting to look for a different kind of leader. Chief Harlan was staring at his own reflection in the one-way mirror of Interrogation Room 3, not because anyone was inside, but because it was the only place in the building where he could breathe without hearing Maddie Bullock's name echo down the hall. He hadn't slept. His eyes were heavy, red at the corners. His shirt was wrinkled beneath his duty vest. That morning, a sergeant had asked if he'd seen the latest footage from the mayor's press conference, where the mayor publicly confirmed that the city had, in fact, entered final stage negotiations for the East Grafton precinct building sale. The sergeant hadn't meant any harm, but Harlan didn't answer. He just walked away, jaw locked, heart thudding behind his badge. Now seated with a styrofoam cup of burnt station coffee, he tapped a pen rhythmically against his thigh. No official statement had been released yet. There was still time to stop this, or at least embarrass Maddie enough to make the city question her influence. He needed something tangible. Something that would discredit her in the court of public opinion. He pulled out a file, a noise complaint dated 7 months ago, filed against one of Maddie's earliest developments, a co-op marketplace she launched in North Bay. Harlan had dismissed it back then. Minor violations. Exaggerated claims. But now? Now it could be a lifeline. He picked up his phone and dialed the old number of Officer Derek Lang, who now worked in zoning compliance. The two hadn't spoken in months, but loyalty still meant something to a few men on the inside. Lang, Harlan said when the line connected. I need your eyes on a site in North Bay. You'll know the one when I send it. Look for anything off-code. Anything overdue. There was a pause on the other end. That place has got community funding. It'll look bad if we roll in without cause. Don't roll in, Harlan said. Just dig. Quiet like. I'll take care of the rest. When he hung up, his hands were shaking. Across town, Maddie stood in the old municipal chamber where the Community Advisory Committee was gathered, an eclectic crew of urban designers, neighborhood reps, youth advocates, and even a city planner or two who hadn't lost hope in change. She adjusted the microphone, took a breath, and looked out over the dozen faces waiting for her words to set the tone. I'm not here to make speeches, she said. But I am here to draw lines. There was a pause. People leaned in. Reclaiming this building isn't just about real estate, she continued. It's about the right to exist, loudly. Without fear. Without being watched, or controlled, or erased. A nod from a young woman in a hoodie with a "Defund Abandonment" pin on her chest. We're not asking the police to disappear. We're asking them to evolve, or move aside while we build something better, with or without them. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't have to. The mayor's aide, seated near the door, scribbled something into a notepad but didn't interrupt. She'd already seen the numbers. Since Maddie's social media campaign launched, over 12,000 signatures had poured into the city's online support portal. Donations for Maddie's nonprofit surged 300% overnight. The public was choosing sides. And they weren't siding with intimidation. After the meeting, Maddie's phone buzzed. Unknown number. She didn't answer. A voicemail dropped seconds later. She clicked play, and braced herself. You like to talk big, Bulick, Harlan's voice crackled through the speaker. But I wonder what the city will say when they find out your market in North Bay failed. Its last fire inspection, or how you used grant money to fix it before anyone could report it. Funny how silence works both ways. Click. Maddie stared at the wall, unmoving. Dante was halfway down the hall when he saw her expression. Maddie? She held up a hand. Call Eileen. Right now. Right now. 2 hours later, Maddie sat in the glass conference room at Eileen's office, tapping her fingers against a legal pad while her lawyer sifted through the scanned files Dante had forwarded from their internal records. There was an inspection, Eileen confirmed. But it passed, barely. And yeah, we used grant money, but that was approved by the Oversight Committee and documented. He's trying to spin half-truths. I don't care what he's spinning, Maddie said. I want to know what happens when he throws it. Eileen closed the file. Then you throw first. Maddie tilted her head. Go to the public again? Get ahead of it. Be honest. Transparent. Make him look like the one playing dirty politics. Maddie didn't smile, but her eyes sharpened. I'll call Mel at the Chronicle, she said. That night, the headline hit digital front pages. Bulick fires back at police chief's intimidation tactics. This is bigger than me. It wasn't just a statement. It was a war drum. Interviews followed. Her team released the full building plans to the public. Open houses for the future community center were scheduled for the following week. Former officers who had quietly resigned from East Grafton PD started sharing stories about Harlan's disciplinary practices. Anonymous, but compelling. The tide wasn't just turning, it was rushing in. And still, Maddie knew the biggest blow hadn't landed yet. Not until she got that final signature. She was still awake at 11:17 p.m. when the email arrived. Subject line, Precinct Purchase Final Stage Approved. From Mayor C.R. Jenkins. Maddie read the message twice. Then she stood up, walked out to her balcony, and looked toward the faint outline of the precinct building on the horizon. She didn't smile. Not yet. But her hand closed into a quiet fist at her side. And in that moment, the city belonged to her. It rained the morning they took the sign down. The weather didn't care that history was unfolding, that a chapter was closing and another was being written, one brick at a time. Maddie stood beneath the scaffolding, a black umbrella in one hand and a coffee she'd barely touched in the other, as the rusted metal letters spelling East Grafton Police Precinct were removed from the stone archway. She didn't clap. She didn't cheer. She just watched, quietly, as pieces of the old world came down. Beside her, her assistant Dante had tears in his eyes he wouldn't admit to. On Maddie's other side stood Mayor Jenkins, her hand resting firmly on Maddie's shoulder, a subtle show of support that would have been unthinkable a year ago. And beyond them, a crowd of nearly 100 gathered under umbrellas and makeshift ponchos, a sea of color and pride. People of every shade and shape, drawn here by something real. The camera crews were already rolling. Drones buzzed overhead. Somewhere nearby, a child held a cardboard sign that read in crooked marker. A future built by us. Maddie finally took a sip of her coffee. It had gone cold. She didn't care. It's really happening, Dante whispered. It's already happened, Maddie replied, not taking her eyes off the building. Now we build what comes next. 3 months earlier, Harlan had cleared out his office with the same pride-swallowed silence he used when he buried his father. No speech. No farewell tour. Just a cardboard box, a few framed commendations, and a resignation letter signed. The same day Maddie's purchase was finalized. The union didn't fight it. Too much press, too much scrutiny, too many young officers unwilling to protect the old guard's ghosts. He left the city quietly, moved somewhere near the border of the state where the only sirens were weather alerts and ambulance runs. Maddie hadn't heard his name since. Inside the former precinct building, demolition was already underway in the back halls. Gone were the detention cells and interrogation rooms. In their place, a blueprint of possibility. Open-floor workspaces, a wellness center, classrooms. A co-op tech hub run by teens from the local charter school. And on the 3rd floor, a sunlit gallery named for Celeste Sinclair. Maddie walked through it now, hard hat snug over her curls, safety vest zipped up, clipboard in hand. Dust clung to the air like memory, and yet the place already felt different. The light came in warmer. The silence held potential, not dread. She paused by the east stairwell, where the tile floor had been ripped up to make room for the indoor garden she was so stubborn about. "You're really doing it," came a voice behind her. She turned. It was Eileen, holding 2 cups of coffee and looking entirely too elegant for a construction site. "I said I would," Maddie answered. "Didn't I?" "You did. But people say a lot of things." Maddie took the cup, smiled. "You came to gloat. Came to breathe. It smells like change in here." They laughed, both knowing how long the road had been, how many late-night strategy sessions, PR fires, zoning battles, and quiet, unseen sacrifices had built this moment. Maddie walked Eileen through the West Wing, pointing out plans as they moved. A room for restorative justice circles. A small black box theater space for spoken word nights. A kitchen staffed by a job training program for returning citizens. Not everything was fully funded yet, but the foundation, literal and metaphorical, was strong. At the far end of the building stood what used to be the captain's office. It would now become a library and archival space dedicated to East Grafton's activists, organizers, and cultural historians. Celeste's handwritten notes were already framed on one wall, next to a photo of her at a protest, bullhorn in one hand, young Maddie in the other. "Not bad for a girl from nowhere," Eileen said, her voice quiet. "She's not from nowhere," Maddie said. "She's from here." Later that afternoon, the grand opening began. The storm had passed. Sun poured through the brand-new floor-to-ceiling windows. Kids chased each other across the freshly planted grass where squad cars once idled. A mural stretched across the front of the building now, painted by a group of local artists. A winding river shaped like a woman's silhouette, lined with hands reaching upward from every direction. At the center of the crowd, Maddie stood behind a podium. She wasn't wearing a suit today, just a bright blue dress and a pair of white sneakers. It felt right. She looked out over the crowd, then back at the building, then forward again. "I don't know what you were told buildings like this are meant for," she began. "But let me tell you what they can become. Silence like reverence. They can become gardens. They can become schools. They can become safe havens. They can become proof that we don't have to accept what was given to us. That we can write our own blueprints." She pointed to the glass facade behind her. "This building used to be about control. Now it's about connection." Applause swelled, rolled like thunder, warm and unstoppable. She closed with the words that had started this entire journey. "I'm not here to take anything away from this city. I'm here to give it back." After the ceremony, as guests spilled inside to explore the new center, Maddie walked alone for a moment into what used to be the evidence room. Now it held donated laptops and workstations. The same space where confiscated dreams once gathered dust now hummed with quiet beginnings. She sat at one of the tables, just for a moment, not to rest, but to feel. She thought of her mother. Of all the times she'd been told no. Of every system that said she was too loud, too ambitious, too much. And then she thought of the kids who would walk through this place tomorrow. With no idea what it used to be, only what it was now. Hope didn't always come with trumpets or sunshine. Sometimes it came with drywall dust and sore feet. Sometimes it looked exactly like this. Maddie Bullock smiled, for real this time. The city had changed, and so had